Hi guys, today we're going to be looking at plywood tanks. I've gone ahead and assembled the box. You've probably seen that dozens of times already. You know how to screw wood together, so I'm not going to waste your time with that, pretending that it's something interesting. The only things that are really worth noting are, first, you want to make sure you use a waterproof wood glue when you assemble this stuff, because there's a good chance you're going to have a leak when you do your first leak test. It's either going to be someplace where the epoxy just bubbled a little bit and you didn't see it, or you're going to have someplace where your acrylic up against the surface, the silicone just didn't hold quite well enough, and you're going to have a little bit of a leak coming through, and you don't want it to run down into the base corner, loosen up your glue, and then create a giant problem for your tank. So, waterproof glue, make sure you have clothes you can throw away because you're not washing it out. Second, self-tapping deck screws are a good idea. I like to get the star heads because I don't have to worry about slipping. There's a lot of places where you're still going to need to pre-drill. I've got a lot of top supports up here.
The biggest problem with top supports is they're not very wide. Because this is layered wood, if you just run a screw straight through here, your wood's going to explode. So you got to make sure that you have clamps that can reach across so you can glue these in place before you drill them. Otherwise, your wood's just not going to hold anything. I ran into that on this sheet at the end. These ones I just glued in. I didn't want to risk it. I'm going to go ahead and drill those in now. But pre-drilling, pre-gluing is a good idea.
We're going to be looking at how you actually mix and apply your epoxies. Coratec polyamide epoxy is what I tend to use. Comes in clear, white, black, safety red. They can tint it for you, but the tint is kind of expensive. When I ran green to do the other tank, which you may have seen in some of my videos, that ran me about $40 a tint. So normally this stuff, each gallon jug is $60. You need one catalyst, you need one epoxy. So you run about $120, but you don't need the whole thing. You only need about half of it, if that. If you're careful, you can get by with about 1/3 of a gallon. So if you've got some other project you want to use this for, great. As we go through this, we're going to be looking at what kinds of silicone work for attaching the inside panel. Most people on YouTube seem to suggest that the GE silicone that you can get at the hardware store is pretty good. It's actually complete garbage. It doesn't hold to acrylic at all, which means that your tank is being held together by water pressure. And that's just not worth it when for $2 more you can order some nice stuff on Amazon. So I'll be showing you that as soon as it gets in. I've got 3 or 4 days of shipping on that, but I've got 3 or 4 days of epoxy work ahead of me. This is not something that you're going to get done quickly. This is something that is going to stink a lot. You need to know that. So if you can plan to do it outside in good weather, you're a lot better off. The other thing we're going to be looking at as part of this is actual aquascaping. We're going to be looking at constructing rock backgrounds. I'm going to be doing a full width background, edge to edge. We'll be building that in place in the tank. This is polyurethane foam and tile grout, several layers of it. We'll be looking at how to do something like this, what kinds of paints are safe for coloring this and won't affect your fish in any way. We're going to be looking at some large plants that you can get for not very much money that are good to go in here as space fillers that aren't going to cause too much loss of space. They're going to give your fish someplace nice to hide to really liven the thing up a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this tank out, give it a quick shop vac, and we're going to mix up some epoxy and get started. So I'm going to be making up about 700 milliliters of this. This is a 50-50 epoxy, so it's pretty straightforward to mix. And start our pour. At your paint store, wherever you pick up your epoxy, you can get these. They've got markings on the side. They've got 1-to-1 ratios, 1 to 1.5, everything up to 8-to-1. So if you don't want to do a fixed thing, or if you're somebody that just hates math, you can always cheat and use one of these things over here. But it's pretty easy with the side. Good. Pour some of our catalyst. I'm going to use 300 milliliters of each. I'm going to be doing a black coat. Then if I can figure out where I put my green, I'll be doing a green coat over that to make sure that I get a really good coverage. If I can't find the green, then I'll be doing a couple layers of the black. This stuff tends to thicken as it ages. So I've had this for a little over a year. It's still good, but it does get a little bit chunky. So it's usually a good idea to, once you pop it open, stir it up real well, even if you get it in the paint store. There's no telling really how long they had it. So the instructions are use a mechanical stirrer, with stirring bars on a drill. I don't ever really do that. I usually just stir it by hand for about 6-7 minutes, call it good. You can see this is absolutely jet black. Gives a really, really beautiful finish. I like the insides of the tanks to be black a whole lot. My wife says that it makes the tank kind of claustrophobic. I'm going to be doing black rock faces on the inside back wall with some gray highlights and things. So it doesn't really matter either way. If I can find the green, great, it keeps my wife happy. If I can't, it's not the end of the world. Now, whenever you're mixing this, make sure that you scrape the edges pretty well, pretty frequently, to make sure that you get any unmixed stuff off the edges. Because if you have pockets of unmixed resin, if you have activator that's just stuck to the edge that comes out when you pour it, then you're going to end up with some odd curing. And again, you want to make sure you get a good, even cure, because otherwise you're going to end up with something that's kind of brittle, and you're going to end up with leaks. Okay, now that I've been stirring this for 5 or 6 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and let this sit for about 30 minutes. What I usually do is I come back after about 15 minutes, I stir it again. That's not strictly necessary, but you do want to let it sit for 30 minutes before you do anything to make sure that the molecules have a chance to really mix. You get a really even cure. And this is not a resin which is okay to do in really thick quantities. You really want to just brush this on, and however thick it goes, it's going to stay. You run it something like paint. And I have, on several occasions when I've done this before in other tanks, if I had a whole lot left over, I just poured it and let it sit on the bottom, thinking, the bottom needs to be a little thicker. I want to make sure it's not going to spring any leaks or anything. And it ends up taking about a week for it to cure, whereas this will cure in usually about 12 hours. It'll get hard enough that you can do a second coat 6 to 10 hours later, depending on temperature, but it's usually about 18 hours before it's not tacky and you can't really do a finger depression. But if it's thicker than just a brush coating, it can take it, like I said, weeks. This should be a 3-day process, but it very quickly balloons out if you're not careful with your thickness. Once you're done with your first coat, you want to give it at least 12 to 18 hours so that it really solidifies well. There's no issues with tackiness or anything, because you really want to give it a good sanding. That's for a couple of reasons. First, you want to get rid of any of the bubbles that might be popping up, because bubbles are places where the water pressure can make it crack, and you're going to end up with leaks that ruin your wood. Second, you want a really good roughed up surface that your next layer can bond into really well. You want to do a minimum of 2 layers of epoxy. Ideally, you want to do 3. So you want to make sure you get a nice surface that it can bond to. Third, it's going to scuff up the surface. It's going to make it look different from whatever you're putting on now, and that's going to make it a lot easier to keep track of where you're putting your fresh coats, especially if you're doing something like a clear coat, because it's impossible to see where you've already been. Scuffing the surface a great deal. It'll all smooth out when you go over it. So I'm going to go ahead and sand this out now, and we'll be back when that's done. Okay, so I've sanded the inside, removed my screw-ups. That goes pretty quickly. When you do this kind of thing, you want to use 60 grit. Don't go anything lower than that, or it'll really chew up your epoxy. If you go anything higher than that, you're going to spend hours doing this. If you're looking for a mirror finish, you can go higher after the 60, but there's no really reason to do that on the first layer. Because it's going to be filled with water, you're not really going to see most of the drips and drops. You just want to knock the heads off. You can see, well, maybe in the background, or maybe you could see it while I was doing it. There are light gray streaks, and then there's the dark area, and the gray streaks are everywhere where it ran or where it applied unevenly. So I was able to take that back down to where it's a much more even thickness, so I can get the next coat on. I'll know that the bottom layer is going to cure all the way because it's going to have all of the stuff that's thick that wouldn't be curing gone at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and put the next layer on. I'm going to use a roller this time because I'm lazy and I made a lot more drips with this than I'm used to, and I don't like the cleanup work. So we'll go ahead and clean this up and get started. That's really it. 3 coats and you're done. It's worth remembering at this point that polyamide epoxy takes about 7 days to cure, so you want to give yourself plenty of time when you do this. You don't have to use the brand that I chose. Coratec is just a good brand to use, but any of the polyamide epoxies work really well for submersion. They're flexible, you're not going to get cracking, and you're not going to have them wear down over time. They all have about the same cure rate, and they all have about the same application thickness, which is 4 to 7 mils. They dry to about 6 mils each, so once you do your 3 layers, you're going to get about an 18 mil thickness, which is really more than enough. It's just there for safety. The next step we're going to be doing is silicone sealing around the actual edges. We're going to be looking at that in the next video, because first I'm going to show you a comparison of what kinds of silicones are on the market, what you can pick up usually locally, and what they actually do for performance on acrylic, which is what you're generally going to be using for a window. Most of the things that you see on fish forums are garbage, so we're going to be looking at that next time to see what the actual truth is. Thanks, take care.